And with Somali pirates going on trial in the United States, we take you back 150 years to the last time a piracy trial made history in America. Lucy Williamson reports.
It's 1861, and in a New York courtroom, 13 men are about to go on trial for piracy.
The atmosphere was almost like a carnival. The room was packed. The participants were really well known to almost everybody on the street. It was about as charged with excitement as you could hope to have.
Mark Weitz is a lawyer and author of a book on the piracy trials of the era.
This was the 19th century. Trials took on an air of entertainment value that probably transcended just about anything that the average citizen could hope to partake in. The trials had been preceded by months of newspaper coverage, so everyone was on edge. Most believed that these people should be hung for piracy, and so it gets started with a tremendous amount of fanfare.
New York Times, October 1861.
Throughout the long day, the courtroom and adjacent passages were densely crowded with a throng of professional and other spectators, eager to catch a glimpse of the prisoners. Captain Baker, the privateer commander, was neatly dressed and appeared tranquil and easy. His associates remained quiet and submissive in their demeanor. Baker sat near his counsel and was rendered conspicuous by his large pair of blue spectacles.
The febrile atmosphere wasn't all down to Captain Baker and his crew. America in 1861 was divided by civil war. The southern states had just declared themselves independent of the Union, and hostilities were building at sea as well as on land. The crew on trial in New York had sailed from the south, and by the time they arrived in court, the dramatic story of how they and their ship, the Savannah, were captured had been vividly told and retold in the local press.
Harper's Weekly, 1861. She happened to perceive the brig Perry in the distance, which she mistook for a merchantman. The Savannah pushed boldly forward to the attack, thinking that she had an easy prey, but when almost within shot distance, she discovered that she had got into the clutches of one of Uncle Sam's emissaries, and immediately the order was given, "Bout ship," and the bold privateer showed the white feather and tried to run. The Perry clapped on all sail and gave hot pursuit. The chase was quite exciting. When the vessels came within range of each other's guns, a simultaneous fire was opened by both crafts. The shots of the Savannah had no effect whatever, they flying far athwart the bows of the ship, and taking every imaginable course but the right one, while, on the contrary, the attack of the United States vessel produced some havoc in the rigging of the enemy, 2 shots passing completely through her foresail and cutting away some of her rope. The Savannah at last hove to, seeing no possible chance of escape, and was immediately boarded by the crew of the Perry. No resistance was made by the pirates.
The Perry opens up on the Savannah, and the first volley, every man on the Savannah, with the exception of one, ducks. Well, it's very difficult to maintain any kind of combat when most of your crew is trying to keep from getting hit.
And who were these crews? What kind of men are we talking about?
A lot of them were sailors who knew the sea but didn't necessarily know how to be sea warriors. Some men had uniforms, mostly the officers would, but other than that, they probably brought their own clothes with them, pants, shirts, probably a top coat. Depending on how experienced they were as sailors, they may or may not have had shoes. Because one of the things that a real sailor would understand is that combat, to the degree that you get into it on the high seas, is an unbelievably messy business. If you've ever been on a British man-of-war or a United States frigate, you should be struck by the fact that next to every gun emplacement or every gun station there's a bucket. Well, that bucket is for sand. And that sand is to spread on the deck so that when the blood starts to flow, people don't slip and fall. So real sailors, whether they had shoes or not, would probably have been barefoot. Some of them would have been bearded. But, contrary to common belief about sailors, whether they're privateers in this era or even sailors of other eras, they weren't, undisciplined brigands. Sailing ships, particularly in combat, takes a lot of skill. So, I'm not saying that they were all saints or that they were all church-going individuals, but they were probably fairly disciplined.
Disciplined or not, the newspapers of the day were in no doubt what should happen to the accused.
The capture of the privateer Savannah will test Mr. Lincoln's nerve. Will he have the courage to hang the pirate captain? In law, the case is clear. The privateer was a pirate craft, and every man on board of her was guilty of piracy. The law declares that the penalty of piracy is death. Will the president suffer the law to take its course, or will he interfere to protect the pirates? Merchants and shipowners who have come forward nobly in support of the government are trembling in apprehension lest Mr. Lincoln should not have the nerve to carry out his policy and crush piracy in the bud.
But the lawyers hired to defend the accused had another interpretation. They argued that the crew of the Savannah were not pirates at all, but privateers, sailors commissioned by a wartime government to carry out attacks on the enemy's merchant fleet. There was just one problem. To prove this, the defence would have to prove to the northern jury that the rebel southern states were, in fact, a nation in their own right.
Algernon Sullivan was a co-counsel in New York. He realized that the key to these men getting off was proving that the Confederacy was a nation. So he began to correspond with the Confederacy. He wrote Robert Hunter, who was the Secretary of State, and he said, look, I need certified documents of the creation of your country, of these letters of marque. Well, when the Union found out he was communicating with the Confederacy, they had him arrested and thrown in jail. So he spent probably 3 or 4 weeks in jail while everybody was preparing for the trial.
What kind of questions came up in the trial?
The prosecution wanted to make these people look like, Long John Silver or Blackbeard. So the questions they would ask are, okay, how is it that you came to do this? And of course the answer was, I asked for and I received a letter of marque from the Confederate government that allowed me to prey on the shipping of a particular nation. So then they would get into questions, okay, did you have a uniform? Did you have a chain of command? What flag were you flying? Well, they didn't fly the Confederate flag. So the argument being, if you're the prosecution, well, you guys were hiding what you were doing. You're not really soldiers because soldiers wear uniforms. They're very upfront about what they do, and you weren't doing that. Were your weapons open and obvious? And the answer to that was obviously no.
Even so, things could have been a lot worse for the crew of the Savannah. As their trial continued in New York, the crew of another ship, the Jeff Davis, was also facing piracy charges in a Philadelphia court. And the same arguments met an even tougher audience there.
It depended on which trial you were in, how much leeway the courts gave you. Because in the Jeff Davis case in Philadelphia, the judges early on made it very difficult for the defense to get into issues of whether the Confederacy was a nation. On the other hand, the judges in New York had decided that if the Confederacy was a nation or not, that was going to be up to the facts, and the jury would make that call. And ultimately, that made all the difference in the world as to how those two trials came out.
And what did happen? How did the trials turn out?
In the Jeff Davis, the 5 men that were indicted and tried were all found guilty. And they were found guilty because at the end of any case, what the court will do is it will charge the jury. It will say, here are your issues. Here's what you're entitled to consider. And in Philadelphia, at the Jeff Davis trial, he told them flat out, you cannot make any decision as to whether the Confederacy is a nation, because I'm telling you it's not. So with that in hand, the letters of marque were meaningless, all of the international law arguments were meaningless, and the jury had no problem convicting those 5 men. However, in New York City, in the case of the Savannah, the court had told the jury, this is your call. You need to look at the facts. And the facts were such that after days of deliberation, the jury came back to the court and said, we can't make a call.
In the end, both crews were kept in jail for several years. President Lincoln judged the threat of retaliation by Confederate forces too great to actually execute any of them. They were later exchanged as prisoners of war.